You'll embarrass us at the ball. Lady Margaret Harrington tightened the final button on Evelyn's glove and stepped back to inspect her daughter. The words were spoken calmly, casually, as though she were commenting on the weather. Yet they struck Evelyn harder than any shouted insult ever could. For a moment she stared at her reflection in the mirror. The pale blue gown was beautiful. The diamonds at her throat belonged to her grandmother. Her dark brown hair had been pinned carefully by 3 maids. By all appearances, she looked exactly like the daughter of a wealthy noble family. Yet none of it mattered, because all she could hear was her mother's voice. You'll embarrass us at the ball. Again. The word remained unspoken, but both women heard it. Evelyn lowered her eyes. I'll be careful. Lady Margaret sighed. That's what you said the last time. The room fell silent. Evelyn felt the familiar knot forming in her stomach. The knot she always felt before social gatherings, before introductions, before dances, before opportunities to disappoint people. Her mother adjusted a wrinkle on her sleeve. The Ashford Winter Ball is the most important event of the season. The entire county will be there. Evelyn nodded. I know. Then try to remember that every action reflects upon this family. The knot tightened. I know. Lady Margaret finally stepped away. Good. Then she left the room. Evelyn remained standing before the mirror long after the door closed, because the painful thing wasn't that her mother believed she might embarrass the family. The painful thing was that a small part of Evelyn believed it too. Before we continue, if you enjoy emotional stories of love, heartbreak, family betrayal, and unforgettable second chances, subscribe to Candlelit Vows and join us for more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, have you ever felt like you could never meet someone's expectations? 7 years earlier, Evelyn Harrington had been a completely different person. At 15, she laughed loudly, spoke confidently, filled rooms with stories and opinions. She loved music, loved books, loved people. Most importantly, she had never been afraid of making mistakes. Then came the piano recital. It had been a small gathering hosted inside their estate. Nothing extraordinary. Friends, neighbors, a few local nobles. Evelyn had spent weeks preparing a difficult piece. The performance went beautifully until the final minute. One wrong note, then another. For a few seconds she lost her place entirely. Embarrassed, she finished the piece and left the piano red-faced. Looking back, it wasn't a disaster. Several guests even complimented her afterward. Most people forgot about it before the evening ended, but her mother didn't. That night, after the guests left, Lady Margaret stood in the music room and stared at her daughter. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? Evelyn blinked. I only made a mistake. People notice mistakes. Mother, you looked unprepared. Evelyn remembered standing there, confused, because nobody else had seemed upset. Yet somehow her mother looked personally wounded, as though Evelyn's mistake had happened to her. It was the first time she ever connected performance with love. The first time she wondered if being accepted depended upon being flawless. 2 years later came the charity banquet. Evelyn accidentally spilled tea on the dress of an influential noblewoman. She apologized immediately. The woman laughed and assured her it was nothing. Problem solved. Or so Evelyn thought. The carriage ride home lasted 40 minutes. Her mother spent 35 of them discussing the incident. You always attract attention for the wrong reasons. Evelyn stared out the window. It was an accident. Accidents have consequences. She wasn't upset. That isn't the point. Evelyn never forgot those words. That isn't the point. Somehow the accident itself never mattered, only how it reflected on the family. By 19, social gatherings felt dangerous. Every conversation became a potential mistake. Every dance became a potential humiliation. Then came the winter ball. During a dance, Evelyn accidentally stepped on her partner's foot. The gentleman laughed. Other guests laughed too, not cruelly, not maliciously. Just one of those harmless social moments people forgot within minutes, everyone except her mother. That night, Lady Margaret delivered the sentence that changed everything. Perhaps social events simply aren't for you. The words were spoken softly, kindly even, which somehow made them worse. Evelyn stopped attending balls after that. Invitations arrived, she declined them. Gatherings happened, she avoided them. The years passed quietly. Society began forgetting she existed. Some people assumed she was ill, others assumed she had become reclusive. A few simply stopped asking. It was easier that way, safer, until this evening, until the Ashford Winter Ball, the largest social event in years, hosted by the prestigious Ashford family. Attendance wasn't optional, not anymore. People are beginning to ask questions, her mother had explained. You must be seen. Evelyn often wondered what people would think if they knew the truth, that she wasn't afraid of strangers. She wasn't afraid of dancing. She wasn't even afraid of embarrassment. She was afraid of proving her mother right. An hour later, carriages crowded the long driveway leading toward Ashford Manor. Golden light spilled from hundreds of windows. Music drifted into the winter air. Servants hurried between arriving guests. Everywhere Evelyn looked, she saw confidence. Beautiful women, distinguished gentlemen, people who seemed born for evenings like this. Her younger sister Caroline certainly looked comfortable. Relax, Caroline said as they entered the grand ballroom. You'll be fine. Evelyn smiled weakly. Caroline meant well, she always had. Unfortunately, kindness wasn't the same thing as understanding. The ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers illuminated polished marble floors. Elegant gowns shimmered beneath candlelight. A live orchestra played near the far wall. Conversations blended together into a constant sea of voices. Too many voices, too much movement, too much noise. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. Smile, her mother whispered. People are looking. Evelyn immediately forced one. The evening began. For a while, everything went surprisingly well. She greeted guests, accepted introductions, managed small conversations. Perhaps tonight would be different. Perhaps she had worried for nothing. Then she overheard two women speaking nearby. Neither realized she was close enough to hear. Is that Evelyn Harrington? One asked. I believe so. Goodness, I thought something was wrong with her. The second woman lowered her voice. I've heard she stopped attending social functions years ago. How strange. They moved on. The conversation lasted less than 10 seconds. Yet it lingered inside Evelyn long afterward. Because they weren't cruel. They were curious, which somehow hurt more. Across the ballroom, Lady Margaret noticed her daughter's expression. She approached immediately. What happened? Nothing. Evelyn, she lowered her voice. Don't start. The knot returned, stronger this time. Evelyn looked toward the crowded dance floor, toward the hundreds of people, toward the impossible expectations she carried into every room. And for the first time all evening, she wondered if her mother might be right. Maybe she didn't belong here after all. Evelyn spent the next hour doing exactly what she had trained herself to do for years. She smiled when spoken to, nodded when appropriate, laughed softly at jokes she barely heard. Most guests were polite. Some were even kind. Yet every conversation felt like walking across thin ice. One wrong step, one awkward pause, one misplaced word. That was all it took. Across the ballroom, her mother moved effortlessly between groups of nobles. Caroline danced twice, then 3 times, then disappeared into another conversation surrounded by admirers. Evelyn wasn't jealous. She couldn't remember the last time she had been jealous. Mostly she was tired of feeling as though every social gathering was an examination she never quite passed. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing servant and moved toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. For a few minutes, she simply watched. Couples danced beneath crystal chandeliers. Laughter drifted through the room. The orchestra transitioned into a slower melody. The entire scene looked beautiful. Everyone else seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Then a gentleman approached. Lady Evelyn. She turned. He was young, well-dressed, handsome. She vaguely recognized him from previous gatherings years ago. Good evening. It's wonderful to see you out again. She smiled politely. Thank you. People have been wondering where you've been hiding. The comment was meant kindly. She knew that. Yet the word hiding struck something painful inside her. Nowhere interesting, I'm afraid. He laughed. You must forgive society. We always become curious when someone disappears. Evelyn nodded. The conversation should have ended there. Instead, he added, though I admit some people assumed you'd left the county entirely. The smile on her face weakened. I see. Not me, of course. He looked embarrassed. I mean, not exactly, Evelyn reassured him quickly. It's fine. But it wasn't. Because she knew he was telling the truth. People had forgotten her. The realization shouldn't hurt, yet somehow it did. The gentleman soon excused himself. Evelyn remained where she was. The knot in her stomach had returned. Larger now. Heavier. She searched the ballroom for her mother. Lady Margaret was laughing with a group of influential guests. Caroline stood beside her looking radiant. Neither noticed Evelyn. Not that she expected them to. A servant carrying a tray passed nearby. Another guest accidentally bumped his shoulder. A few champagne glasses rattled. The sharp sound made Evelyn flinch unexpectedly. Her pulse quickened. She looked toward the exit. Perhaps a few minutes of fresh air would help. She started moving carefully through the crowd. One step, then another, then another. Breathe. Just breathe. Everything is fine. Yet the ballroom seemed louder now. The orchestra, the conversations, the footsteps, the laughter, they blended together until it felt impossible to separate one sound from another. Evelyn's hands began trembling. Not visibly, not yet, but enough for her to notice. She quickened her pace. The exit wasn't far, just a little farther. Then she heard her mother's voice. Where are you going? Evelyn froze. Lady Margaret had appeared beside her. I just need a moment. Her mother frowned immediately. A moment? Some fresh air. Evelyn. That tone again. The warning tone. The disappointed tone. People will notice. Evelyn felt heat rising in her face. I won't be gone long. Please don't start tonight. The words struck harder than they should have, because suddenly Evelyn was 15 again, standing beside a piano. Suddenly she was 17, sitting in a carriage after the tea incident. Suddenly she was 19, listening to her mother explain why social events weren't for her. Years of criticism crashed together inside a single moment. I'm trying, Evelyn whispered. Her mother sighed. Then try harder. Something inside Evelyn cracked, not dramatically, quietly, the way things often break after years of pressure. She turned away before anyone could see tears forming. The exit was only a few yards away. She could make it. Just reach the door. Just leave quietly. Just avoid another mistake. Then it happened. A servant carrying a towering display of champagne glasses stepped directly into her path. The servant tried moving left. Evelyn moved left too. He shifted right. She did the same. For one brief second both froze. Then the tray tilted. Time seemed to stop. One glass fell, then another, then 10 more. The entire champagne tower collapsed. Crystals shattered across the ballroom floor. Champagne spilled everywhere. The orchestra stopped playing. Conversations died instantly. Hundreds of heads turned. Silence. Complete silence. Evelyn stood frozen at the center of it all. Her worst fear had finally happened. Every eye in the room was on her. Somewhere nearby, a glass continued rolling across the marble floor. The sound seemed impossibly loud. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Then came the whispers. Tiny at first, barely audible, yet unmistakable. Evelyn felt her chest tighten. She couldn't breathe properly, couldn't think properly, couldn't move. The servant immediately knelt down. "My lady, I'm so sorry. It wasn't even her fault. Not entirely." Rationally, she understood that. Emotionally, it didn't matter. Because years of fear were suddenly standing in front of her. Proven correct. Then, Lady Margaret arrived. The entire ballroom watched. For one impossible second, Evelyn hoped. Hoped her mother would ask if she was hurt. Hoped she would place a hand on her shoulder. Hoped she would finally choose her daughter over appearances. Instead, Lady Margaret closed her eyes and whispered words that would haunt Evelyn forever. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. Not concern, not comfort, embarrassment, public embarrassment." Evelyn felt something inside her go completely numb. Around them, guests pretended not to listen, which only made it worse. Caroline appeared beside their mother. Perhaps Evelyn should go home. She meant well. Evelyn knew she meant well, but hearing it aloud felt like another wound. Go home, leave, disappear. Again. Evelyn nodded slowly. "You're right." Her own voice barely sounded familiar. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. Nobody stopped her. Nobody followed. Nobody called her name. The massive ballroom continued watching as she disappeared through the doors. Several moments passed. Then conversations slowly resumed. The orchestra began playing again. Guests returned to dancing. Life moved on. Everyone seemed relieved the disturbance was over. Everyone except one person. Standing near the center of the ballroom, Duke Nathaniel Ashford looked toward the closed doors Evelyn had just passed through. Then he looked around the room, at the guests, at Caroline, at Lady Margaret. Finally, he asked a question that immediately silenced the people nearest him. "Has anyone checked whether Lady Evelyn is all right?" Nobody answered the Duke's question. For a moment, the only sound in the ballroom came from the orchestra awkwardly attempting to resume the music. Nathaniel looked around the room again. Hundreds of guests, nobles, ladies, gentlemen. Not one person seemed particularly concerned about Evelyn Harrington. They were concerned about the broken glasses, the interruption, the awkwardness, the spectacle, but not the woman at the center of it. Lady Margaret forced a smile. "I'm sure she's fine." Nathaniel studied her face. "You're sure?" The question carried no accusation. Somehow that made it worse. Lady Margaret adjusted her posture. Evelyn has always been sensitive. Nathaniel glanced toward the doors. "I see." Then he set down his untouched champagne glass. "If you'll excuse me." Every conversation nearby stopped. Several guests exchanged confused looks. Lady Margaret blinked. "Your Grace." Nathaniel offered a polite nod. Then he walked away. Straight through the ballroom, straight through the crowd, straight through the grand double doors Evelyn had disappeared through. For the second time that evening, silence followed someone leaving. Outside, the winter air felt sharp against Evelyn's skin. She sat alone on a stone bench overlooking the gardens. The cold barely registered. Her thoughts were louder than the orchestra had ever been. 7 years. 7 years of trying not to embarrass her family. 7 years of measuring every word, every movement, every smile, every mistake. And tonight she had failed anyway. A bitter laugh escaped her. Perhaps her mother had been right all along. The sound of footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Evelyn quickly wiped her eyes. She expected a servant. Perhaps Caroline. Maybe even her father. The last person she expected was Duke Nathaniel Ashford. He stopped several feet away. Respectful, giving her space. "May I sit?" Evelyn stared at him. You should be inside. Nathaniel glanced toward the brightly lit manor. Music drifted faintly through the night. Perhaps. The ball is still happening. So I've heard. Despite everything, Evelyn almost smiled. Almost. Nathaniel sat beside her. Neither spoke for several moments. The silence felt surprisingly comfortable. Eventually, Evelyn shook her head. You really shouldn't be here. Nathaniel looked toward the stars. Why not? Because everyone important is inside. His answer came immediately. Exactly. Evelyn turned toward him. For the first time all evening, she genuinely didn't know what to say. Nathaniel studied the garden. Do you know what I saw in that ballroom tonight? Evelyn laughed softly. Unfortunately, yes. No. He shook his head. I didn't see a woman embarrass herself. Her chest tightened. You didn't? I saw a crowded room become more interested in broken glasses than a human being. The words settled somewhere deep inside her. Nathaniel continued. I saw a young woman apologize for an accident that wasn't entirely her fault. Evelyn lowered her eyes. The glasses still fell. Glasses are replaceable. She swallowed hard. My mother won't see it that way. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, Has she always been like this? Evelyn laughed again. This time there was no humor in it. Which part? Nathaniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. Evelyn looked out across the dark garden. For years she had protected her mother's reputation. Excused her behavior, explained it away. Yet suddenly she was tired. Tired of carrying the burden alone. So she told him. About the piano recital. About the tea incident. About the winter ball. About every warning. Every criticism. Every disappointed look. Every time she had been made to feel like a problem that needed solving. Nathaniel listened without interrupting. When she finally finished, he remained silent for several moments. Then he asked one simple question. Did anyone ever tell you that those things weren't your fault? Evelyn frowned. What? The piano recital. Nathaniel looked directly at her. Did anyone tell you that making mistakes is normal? She shook her head slowly. The tea accident. Another shake. The dance. Evelyn felt tears returning. No. Nathaniel nodded. Not because he was surprised, because he finally understood. Then allow me to be the first. Evelyn stared at him. Nathaniel's voice softened. One mistake doesn't define a person, Lady Evelyn. Something inside her broke. Not painfully, not violently, like ice finally melting after a long winter. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Nathaniel pretended not to notice, a kindness she appreciated more than he could possibly know. The following weeks changed everything. Not quickly, not dramatically, slowly. Nathaniel began visiting the Harrington estate. At first he claimed he wished to discuss charitable projects. Then local education. Then estate management. Eventually even Lady Margaret stopped pretending to believe his excuses. Everyone knew why he came. He came for Evelyn. More importantly, he came because he enjoyed her company. Nathaniel discovered that Evelyn was intelligent, funny, insightful. She loved literature, understood history, remembered small details about people. She was the opposite of the awkward burden society imagined. The tragedy wasn't that Evelyn lacked confidence. The tragedy was that someone had convinced her she should. One afternoon, nearly 3 months after the ball, Nathaniel invited Evelyn to walk through the Ashford Gardens. Spring had arrived. Flowers bloomed everywhere. Birds filled the air with song. They stopped beside a fountain surrounded by white roses. Nathaniel seemed unusually nervous. Evelyn noticed immediately. What is it? Nathaniel laughed softly. You're observant. You look terrified. I am. That surprised her. Before she could ask why, Nathaniel reached into his coat and removed a small velvet box. Evelyn froze. The world seemed to stop. Even the birds felt quieter. Nathaniel opened the box. A beautiful ring rested inside. Tears instantly filled her eyes. Nathaniel. He took a slow breath. The first time I truly saw you, you believed you had embarrassed everyone around you. Evelyn's vision blurred. I remember. But the only people who embarrassed themselves that night were the people who made you feel unwelcome. Tears spilled freely now. Nathaniel smiled. For 7 years, you've carried mistakes that should have been forgotten within minutes. His voice grew softer. You spent so long worrying about disappointing others that you forgot something important. Evelyn whispered, What? Nathaniel stepped closer. You were never the disappointment. The tears became impossible to stop. Nathaniel laughed quietly. I had a longer speech prepared. Evelyn laughed through her tears. I figured. He dropped to one knee. Lady Evelyn Harrington, will you marry me? She looked at the man before her. The man who had seen her when nobody else did. The man who had left an entire ballroom because he cared more about her well-being than society's approval. The answer had lived in her heart for months. Yes, Nathaniel smiled. Yes. Yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger. Somewhere behind them came applause. Evelyn turned in surprise. Her father stood nearby, several friends, servants, even Caroline. Everyone smiling, everyone celebrating. Then her eyes found her mother. Lady Margaret stood quietly at the edge of the gathering. Tears filled her eyes. For once there was no criticism, no disappointment, no warning, only regret. Later that evening, she approached Evelyn privately. I spent years trying to protect our reputation. Her voice trembled. I never realized I was damaging my daughter instead. Evelyn said nothing. Lady Margaret wiped her eyes. I'm sorry. The words couldn't erase the past, but they mattered, because they were true. As the sun set behind Ashford Manor, Evelyn looked around, at the people she loved, then down at the ring on her finger. For years she had believed her greatest fear was embarrassing her family. Now she understood the truth. Her greatest mistake had been believing her worth depended on their approval. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And remember, the opinions that hurt us most are often the ones we mistakenly give the most power. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us again for more.